Hey YouTube, in this video I'm not going to be working on this car, but my daily driver. The CV boot is torn on the driver's side. Car does have 160,000 plus miles, and it is now over or about 15 years old. So the I bought a aftermarket new CV axle, the Cardone or Cardone. I got the HD version. It was $20 more, but it had the I guess the HD stands for heavy duty. Has a upgraded boot, I guess. And then I know the aftermarket is not as good as the OEM, but the OEM is it's a lot more expensive, and I plan to reboot the OEM. So I did also buy a boot kit from Toyota, and so but the aftermarket is it was only $70 from RockAuto, and so I'm gonna give it a shot. And then when I take the old one, the OEM, I'm gonna reboot it, keep it a spare. The good thing is it's the same axle on both sides, so when the passenger boot rips, I can have one ready to swap out. At least that's the plan. So what I'm gonna do is of course jack up the car, remove the wheel, and hopefully I don't have to remove the suspension ball joint. There is a couple bolts that looks like I could just remove, and as you can see, the inner, or the inner boot, I guess you call that, is ripped, and I did use some rubber tape, which works temporarily but is already starting to fall apart. So there you go. Okay, I have a 21 millimeter. Okay, I got the wheels off, of course, and next is removing this cover. I'm just going to use a screwdriver and slowly work my way around, pop it off. And you will need a 35 millimeter socket to remove the axle nut. And then we'll have to remove a couple bolts underneath, and the sway bar end link here, or drop down link. Looks like I'm gonna need something a little bit sharper. So it's kind of rusted, so I'm gonna try to put some WD-40, or if you have some PB blaster or something, might help. Okay, once it comes loose, just gotta work your way around. There we go. So next I'm gonna remove this cotter pin. The kit did come with a new cotter pin, and then this lock washer. Okay, so next is removing this axle nut. I got this 35 millimeter socket from Amazon. It was like 10 bucks, and I'm just gonna use a impact wrench to remove it. I got this larger Milwaukee, which I think will should be powerful enough to remove it. The other way is to use a large breaker bar. Either put the wheel back on a large breaker bar, or you might be able to have someone hold the brake while you turn it with the breaker bar. So came off no problem. Okay, next I'm going to remove these two 19 millimeter bolts at the bottom, which I like the design. It's much easier to remove these two bolts than having to deal with that ball joint with a puller, which I don't have either. So okay. Well, this is actually aren't designed for these big bolts, but so I'm gonna use the big one. There we go. Okay, next I'm gonna remove the sway bar end link. Just this bolt here. I think it's 17 millimeter. Okay, I got the sway bar end link out. I did have to use a rubber mallet to and hammer it out a little bit, and also had to use a jack to raise the suspension a little bit to reduce the tension of the sway bar, and then just pry it out. Next I'm gonna pound this in the axle, and I'm not sure we need to remove the brake caliper and the bracket for the brake line. I'm gonna try leaving it, and then I'm gonna try to remove the axle from the differential using a long pry bar or crowbar in this case. This looks like about 30-inch or so, and hope we'll see how. And that's going to be the tricky part. See how hard that's going to be to remove. Okay, actually, once you lift this out towards you, it should come out much easier, of course. There it goes. Okay, so I'm going to start trying to remove the axle from the differential next. Okay, so when I try to use this pry bar, wedge it against this part here and against that and see if it'll pop off. If not, we may have to remove the undercarriage cover to gain better access. before I do that, let me get a bucket. Because the oil's probably going to drip. So I am going to remove the this cover here. This looks like it's held by just 4 17mm bolts. Okay, I got the CV axle out. I end up using the tool you see there, like a pitchfork, to wedge it and pop it out. I'm glad I had that tool. I used that for a Corolla a few years ago doing the CV axle, and worked also in this case. So now I need to decide whether to replace the old seal, which I probably should, but I don't have the right tool. So, or try to reuse this, which I'm worried it might leak if I do. So I think I'm gonna try, and once I remove it, there's no going back. But I do have the new one, and I think I'm gonna put the new one in the new shaft and then just insert it that way. Okay, as you can see, I got the old one out, and then I'm just comparing, making sure the new part I got is the correct size and it's gonna fit, and it looks like it will. I decided to reuse the old seal. The old seal looked like it's in good condition, and I didn't want to risk putting in the new one incorrectly, and that's what I'm gonna go with. Let's try to get this in. Now, where is it should be correct. The pin opening should be on the bottom. And get this in. Now we'll try to, and then let me see. Try to. Actually, you can help me hold this over here, because I'm gonna try to slide it in. You can turn off the camera for now. I hold this. Okay, so as you can see, I got the axle in. Just a couple notes. I just put it in position, and then I took this shaft and then just slide it in and in, hammered it in a few times by sliding it like a slide hammer. And I did have to remove this hose bracket, because when I was moving this out the way, it was stretching the hose, and you could risk damaging the brake line, of course. I didn't have to remove the brake caliper, which is nice. And I just loosened the bolt here and there for the brake line bracket. You do have to be careful of the hydraulic line, not to bend it too much. Okay, next, the hard part I think is done, so I'm just gonna put everything back. But before I do that, I do need to refill the differential oil. So you'll need a 10 millimeter hex socket like this to remove the fill plug. And normally you would probably remove that first and even drain the oil, but I'm just gonna the reason you remove the fill plug first is you want to make sure you're able to remove it before you drain the fluid, of course, or else you're going to be in trouble. But I've replaced this fluid not too long ago, so I have the right tool, so I'm not too worried about removing it. So anyway, so I'm going to do that next. Okay, so I got all the bolts tightened to the torque specs. 50 foot-pound or so. The two big bolts here is 170-ish, I forget, foot-pound, and then this one is also somewhere in that range. But anyway, next I'm just going to put this retaining lock washer, put a new cotter pin, and then put the cover back on. Put the wheel, clean up, and then test drive to see if it leaks. Okay, I think I'm pretty much done. Just wanted to show you what it looks like, the new aftermarket. Also check to make sure everything looks good. The axle is seated, and I checked that by tugging on it, and it's locked in. And on this side, it's all the way seated as well, obviously with that axle nut pulling on it, and also made sure not to damage the inner seal. And let's take a close-up look at this part. And yeah, so the hard part was getting the old one out. I did have the tool that helped me in my case. That it was the which I'll show you in the picture somewhere in this video, and where I got it. There are several options to get it off. A pry bar would have been another option with a big hammer, but even with that tool I used, it was stubborn to get out. So here's the old CV axle. It was ripped right where the clamp is, but on this side I used some rubber tape for temporary. It lasted maybe a couple weeks, and this hopefully helped me preserve it so I can reboot it, and hopefully it's still the grease is still good inside. So here are some of the less common tools that I use that help me finish this job a lot easier. The 35mm socket, the big hammer, that pitchfork axle popper that I got from I think Amazon, and a long pry bar I didn't use in this case, but other people had success using long pry bar and a big hammer. And then a 10mm Allen socket for the fill bolt for the differential to add the oil that leaked out, or you may want to flush and replace also. And also the impact cordless impact wrench helped to remove the axle nut and the two bolts at the bottom.